Hey everyone, today we have humans who just won the October monthly qualifier tournament, which will qualify them for the World Championships. And we're just going to go over some deck lists and some tournament prep, and then look at a few plays from the tournament. Um, so, first off, we have your Riva deck, which you said was just the most powerful deck in the format, and you felt that the best approach to tournaments was just to pick the most powerful decks. So, is what's kind of the strategy behind the Riva deck here, just in general, if people aren't familiar with the general strategy behind the Songhai decks?
Um, First of all, hey, how you doing?
Oh yes.
uh, Secondly, the Reaver deck is it's actually sort of a really interesting playstyle. It's kind of you can switch between going aggro and getting sort of early turn three, four, or five kills. Or you can play like a more sustained control game where you remove the board and just slowly chip away at your opponent's health. So it's kind of like a combo deck, but it doesn't, it has some combos in it, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not restricted to a specific set of combos. Um, I think when they have been building up Songhai over all this time, they've just had all these cards that are just a little bit too powerful, and then when they come together in synergy like this, it was absurd. That's why you'll notice with the last patch they changed three of the key cards for Songhai, being Spelljammer, um, the Mana Vortex, and the Lantern Fox. And they were significant changes too. This deck is in its current form is not quite playable anymore. The Mana Vortex change was quite large. I don't think Mana Vortex, now that it doesn't draw a card, you pretty much, you can't use it early on. It lacks a lot of its versatility. The four mana Spelljammer means that it's not a good, like, you can't play it turn one going second, which makes it sort of a lot of a weaker card. It's a lot slower. And then because turn one Spelljammer plus a one drop, either the Blood Rage Mask or the Katara, or just turn one Spelljammer in general, just playing it down somewhere was a really strong play when they implemented it. And then the Lantern Fox nerf as well, now that it's got three health, is also less of a strong early game play. It's easier to kill, to clear it off with, say, a three attack turn one minion, of which there are a few things like Hearth Sister and the Abyssian Creep minion. I forget what it's
The
called.
the ooze, I think it is. The 3/3
Yeah,
ooze, yeah.
yeah. So that the deck definitely taken a hit, but it's still actually there's other versions of it. I think Tundra No Caps, also known as Thunder God on Discord. If you find him in game or in Discord, he plays a new Reaver list that's very similar to this current one. Um, but I think he's made a few changes, and it's been working really well for him. I think he's currently third on the S rank ladder, so that's a really strong deck. But yeah, the general strategy with this was basically take this deck because it is the most powerful deck in the format. So it has a favorable matchup against pretty much everything except for a couple of very difficult to play decks.
Right. Yeah, I know. No way it's Jay in a lot of his write-ups says he brings Riva basically with the intention of it getting banned every time. He just thinks it's
Yes.
strong enough that people are just going to ban it, so he doesn't even have to worry about playing it. So yeah, this deck actually is probably exactly what they were targeting with the nerfs. It seems, especially I think the Mana Vortex nerf is pretty huge because it not replacing itself is probably going to kind of affect your card count and the critical mass of spells you can play. Um,
Yeah. It just early on, um, even turn one, but usually turn two or three, you could play the Mana Vortex, and it would have a huge effect on the board and then replace itself in your hand, so you weren't disadvantaged at all. You gained a giant lead on the board. and then weren't disadvantaged. And then late game, it also still had versatility in that it can allow you with things like the Four Winds, the Blood Rage Mask, and the Sharkry to just have those sort of that extra mana. So it was both good early and late game, and with literally like no real downside to it. Sure, there might be times when you draw too many mana vortexes and you can't do much in your turn, but those were much rarer than the turns where you would just have these really explosive out of control turns where you can just run away with the game.
Right. Yeah, Songhai seemed like a deck that had so many different card combinations it could use that as long as it had enough cards, it didn't matter if you had a mana vortex that you had to wait a turn to get the card back. So it
Yeah.
proccing all those effects was really powerful. So I'd imagine that's the biggest hit this deck will take going forward. But I mean, the Spelljammer also is kind of a. It's for people who don't know, it got hit to a. It's now a 4 mana minion that is a 3/5, I believe. So it
Yeah.
got +1 mana and then +1/+1. And basically, since it was an aggressive card, the idea is that would slow it down a little bit and make it a little more balanced and not
It's
coming
it's a
down.
big
What were you saying?
it's a big change because 3 mana minions are actually hard to find good ones in duels at the moment. There's playable ones, they're generally like good, but they're not like really good. And Spelljammer for aggressive decks was a really good 3 mana minion. Whereas for 4 mana, all of a sudden there's the amazing statted Golem, which doesn't even get played, and then you move up the each tier. Um, Things that are just the 4 drops in the game are all really strong, so it's hard to find a spot for Spelljammer in the 4 slot when before it was an easy pick for the 3 slot. So it's an indirect nerf for some decks. It's now more viable in the slower decks where before you wouldn't want to play Spelljammer too early. Now for those decks, it's a viable pick because you can drop it like much later in the game combined with maybe something else, and then next turn you have that extra card to finish off the game. So
Right.
it's definitely slowed down the meta, that change.
Yeah, and they also hit Blistering Scorn, which was another of the 3 drops that was a pretty common play, at least for a time. So it'll be interesting to see where the 3 drop slot gets filled out now that two of kind of the more common neutral cards have been pushed to the 4 slot instead.
And two of the faction cards too in the 3 slot as well, with again like we're saying the Reaver, the Lantern Fox,
Right.
and also Fae, or rather Vanna, had its Cryogenesis nerfed as well to 4 mana, so it makes it a lot harder. Sort of previously in that deck, that was a very good 3 mana turn play, was to Cryogenesis their minion, denying them that early mana tile. And even if you were going first after you played your minion, and the next turn if they had removed your minion, you could then remove whatever minion they played, or just in general it was a really good 3 mana card. Whereas now you're kind of sitting there and it's 4 mana and you're thinking, oh, do I still want to play this for 4 mana? I can't play it turn 1 or anything like that. I can't play it turn 2 going first with a 2 drop, and it makes it a little bit more difficult.
Right. So yeah, that's so they really hit the 3 drop slot pretty hard, it seems like, with the nerfs, whether that's intentional or not. Um, so that's pretty interesting to see how that changes. I noticed I forgot to update some of my decks today when I was playing, and I had some Blistering Scorns and Spelljammers that I noticed my curves were kind of thrown out of balance because of the shift upward in mana some for some of those key cards. So deck building will definitely have to change a little bit, which is probably the intention of these nerfs to kind of make decks a little less strong on the front end.
Yeah.
So, so I think that's a good summation of the Reva deck. It'll be interesting to see how that changes. Maybe I could check out the list, the Tundra caps, I believe you said.
Yeah, Tundra no caps.
Tundra no
So
caps.
is
Okay,
his name in Duelist,
right.
and then in Discord it's Thunder_God.
Tundra.
So
Okay. And so next we have your Control Fey list, which I think has a lot of interesting cards in terms of things that don't necessarily see a ton of play or haven't seen play much until recently. And I think you kind of start off with, I think the first card that a lot of people won't see much is Icy. So I mean, battle pets don't see a lot of play because a lot of their the behavior is very difficult to control. Against some cards, it's a huge liability, like Earth Sister, Nimbus, which don't see as much play right now. So it might be an opening. Especially Lantern Fox got hit. That was another counter to them. So what made you want to bring Icy here, and what makes it an effective battle pet when most others don't see any play?
Well, I was doubtful of Icy at first as well. I thought this minion isn't very good. You know, it's fairly statted as a 2/3 for 2, but as a battle pet, it's sort of you expect it to be, have higher stats. It should have, 3/3. Um, but the battle cry of freezing a minion or a general is actually really strong. Um, there's a lot of, or there was and still is, a lot of minions in the meta where just putting them off for one turn is a huge advantage to you. There's massive big drops that get huge, like the Abyssal Juggernaut and things like even like an Ironcliff Guardian, say for example. And even the smaller stuff like Lantern Fox, not stopping that thing from being able to attack. Also stopping the general from running away from you or from positioning better. It's especially useful, as you can see, we're running quite a lot of walls. So say for example, if you can trap a general into a corner or against the wall with your walls and then icy them, it makes it really difficult for them. So for example, icy plus the
The Blazing Spines.
no, Blazing Spines is good, but the should remember the
Gravity
name
Well.
of my own cards. Sorry, just let me look
Oh,
it
no
up.
worries.
Gravity Well, yes,
Okay.
Gravity Well. Sorry. Having Gravity Well plus Icy against the general, you can trap them in, and they can't attack the Gravity Wells. So if they've got all squares, some free squares around them, they can still play minions. But they lose that. You basically just gained a free Gravity Well as well as freezing them for a turn. And if they haven't got any spaces around them, like if they were against a wall or in a corner, then they can't play any minions that turn. They have to actually manually remove something next to them, which means they have to spend another spell or some extra mana. So it really, the icy, just as a not necessarily as something that you want to have lots of. I usually play either one or two of it depending on how I'm feeling, but it can come in quite useful very often.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I never really considered the idea of getting kind of the full time walk if you can box them in and then stun the general. So that's kind of an interesting. It probably won't come up all the time, but when you can get that, that's certainly a very powerful effect.
Yeah.
From especially from just a 2-drop minion.
But yeah, it's also generally quite good, like you said, with the Blazing Spines that we play them or we get them off of White Asp.
Right, right. So that's one of the other cards I wanted to talk about. White Asp sees some play, but is kind of kind of floats around the meta. It's not really played in the more aggressive versions because you'd rather have the just the 3 attack
It
or
really amused me actually after winning that tournament. A lot of people were saying like, why did you put in White Ass? Like, was that an accident? Did you not mean to? Was it a joke? What are you going to change that now, like when you go to play it? And I'd actually this is the deck that I played last month on the ladder, and I got to the number 3 spot. I was actually at number 2, but Solafid managed to, in the last 24 hours, climb to the top of the ladder and put me down to number 3. And this was the list, and I hadn't changed it. I think I had put in the Azure Heralds instead of, they were previously the other 2/3 for 2 that heals
the healing
the
mystic.
Healing Mystic. Yeah. So the Wipe Asp, firstly, 4 or 5 attack is really it's a strong breaking point for a lot of minions. Being able to take something out with 4 or 5 attack, so it really is important to get. So any weapon that gives you that kind of attack. So for example, the 3 mana +3/+3 is really it's a strong card. Um, that on its own is okay, and then when you add in the giving yourself the blazing spines in this deck, you can see we've got aspects of the fox. We got 3 of those. We got double aspect of the mountain. We've got triple hearth sister. We have the IC to lock them in. We also have triple Primus Shieldmaster and triple Gravity Well. So if we can, and of course the double Bone Reaper as well. If we can lock them down next to a Blazing Spines, that's a 3/3, and 3/3s are costed at around 2 mana. A 3/3 wall is costed at around 1 mana. So when you get a good weapon, which is the 3/3 for 3 mana, and then you add in the fact that you can generate up to 3 of these walls, suddenly it's an amazing weapon. You can carry away the game where you lock them down, you remove one of their big minions with it, then you lock them down next to a 3/3, and now your general has 5 attack. Next turn you hit them for 8 with face, Bloodborne spell and things like Chromatic Cold, and like I said, the aspect of the fox on any spare walls you have hanging around. All of a sudden you've got this insane burst in a control deck. So it really, White Asp is I wouldn't run 3 because generally you won't want to have 2 equipped. It's not quite like the Linar, the Argeon artifact, where the more you have of it, the more it stacks. You
The
can't
Arclight Regalia, I think it is.
3/3, which would be good, but
And I think one of the other interactions that might not be as important, but cards like I believe like Reaper of the Nine Moons or Delotus,
oh
the
yes,
the wall will actually.
Deotus
What is it?
spawns randomly next to your general.
Oh,
But
you're right. You're right.
Rebirth minions and
Right.
Reaper of the Nine Moons.
And like
And
Allomancer doesn't see a ton of play, but that
yeah,
that as
but
well.
there are definitely things out there where it's really good that against Magma. I think in the finals, I stopped a Rebirth minion, and that's the other thing is placing that wall there when you remove their minion. Often it makes their positioning more difficult because you can it's a wall. You can wall yourself off if they've placed a minion in front of them or next to you. You can step back, hit it, and then now all of a sudden they can't get to you. You've got this wall sitting there in the way, which is really good for Faye because of, like I said, her BBS and all of her reach and board clear. She wants to prolong the game. She wants to be blocking you off and making your life difficult. The longer the game goes on, the more time she's gonna hit that BBS, which removes your health. She can get value from all of the minions in the deck, and she puts you on a clock. If you're on 10 health, 5 turns may seem like a long time, but as the clock ticks down, you're thinking, oh geez, 5 turns ago I thought, oh, this will be fine, I'll easily finish this game in 5 turns, and then now you're staring at Faye and she's killed you.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's 5 turns unless they get another Chromatic Cold, or unless you get a
Yep.
wall that turns into a fox all of a sudden, or
Yeah,
it
like I
just
said with that first, you can really, with Vanard, it like you said, 5 turns, oh, I've got 5 turns, all of a sudden, oh no, I've only got 3 turns because he has all these extra damage sources.
right. Yeah, I know. Yeah, White Asp is a card that I really, really like, and it's cool to see it in a deck where it's pretty well suited. It sounds like. Um, so I'm glad that you had a good experience, and I'd like to try this deck out more myself, maybe on the ladder. So one thing just before we keep going with the cards that I wanted to kind of get into is you mentioned this deck was good because it was doing well on the ladder, and you felt that was because it has a very good matchup against Riva. That's
Yes.
so now we're talking about Riva that just got 3 cards nerfed, or maybe some other people have different builds. So what does that mean for this deck? Does that mean that this deck is not going to be as played, especially since Cryogenesis also got hit, which is in here a 3-drop, but it will be a 4-drop going forward. So what do you
Yeah.
think of the future of this deck?
Well, I actually played a few more games on the ladder. I think 4 post patch, and I won all 4 of them, and I've moved up to number 1 on the ladder. So
Congratulations.
thank you very much. The deck still works. There was a tournament, I believe it was yesterday, uh, where myself and Panda JJ, who I attributed part of the creation to the list to, we both played this deck, and he made it to. We played off earlier in the tournament, and I beat him, and then we got to the third and fourth place match, and he beat me with it. So if you know the people that got to the top 4, 2 of them, third place and fourth place, were still both playing almost exactly the same list. It's definitely still good. It has still got a good match up against Songhai. It's actually got a really good match up against Lionar, and a lot of people are thinking Argion's going to be, the new top tier deck. So this having a good matchup against that is good. It doesn't have a great matchup against Cassava, and I don't think it's got a very good matchup against Vath. It can win against Vath a decent amount of the time, but against Cassava it's very difficult to win. But I'm still working on the list to try and make it so that we have a better chance of winning against Cassava. So that's not very good for it in the meta, and that I think Cassava is going to still be a reigning champion. So it's definitely viable considering it's had results, but I'm not sure if it's still as strong as it was, because I think previous to the patch it was actually the strongest deck. I think it was technically stronger than Reaver because it could beat Reaver. But now we'll have to wait and see how the rest of the meta sorts out. If there's a lot of players that are playing Cassava and we can't make this strong against Cassava, then we'll definitely have to rethink what's a good choice.
Right, yeah, you kind of have that cycle of the rocks, paper, scissors sometimes, that as
Yeah.
some decks rise. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you, you said you played a very similar list. Cryogenesis is one of only 5 3-drops in this entire deck and has now moved to the 4-drop. So
Yeah.
would you still play full 3 of those, or is that something you'd look to move, or is the removal just too important to
The
lose?
removal's really important, and currently I'm playing 3. I've considered taking it out and putting in some other things. Especially, I was thinking of adding in the thing that pings things, a blood tier alchemist instead, because we definitely need some form of removal. So even if it's just 1 damage, combined with other things that we have in the deck, we can have a better chance of removing stuff. But so far my experience is just we're a lot less stronger in the early game, but I think the deck is still strong enough, especially like I said, against a lot of the top tier stuff, and the removal is just super important. Cryogenesis before gave you a huge early game boost, but this deck never really struggled in the early game. You've got all these taunts and all these positioning things like your walls, and you've got all this stuff to help you survive in the early game. So early game wasn't a big problem for the deck anyway. So it's not a huge deal having it go to 4 mana. One of the biggest problems of the deck actually is making sure that you have the sustain, because that's what the deck is all about, is making sure to be able to sustain itself, which you need the cryogenesis for.
Right. Yeah, I was just wondering, it's interesting that this deck, you said the deck has a very strong early game, and it's interesting that in Duelist, a control deck like this even tops out its curve at 6 mana and has 14 2-drop spells, or minions and spells. So you do play a lot on the lower end. So it's just interesting that even the control decks are that way.
It's doubly interesting when you consider the fact that, unlike most games, Duelist starts you at
2 or 3 mana?
2 and 3 mana, 2
Right.
if you're going first and 3 if you're going second, and there's extra mana tiles on the board. So you actually have sort of a lot of extra sources of mana, so you kind of you you're spending a lot of mana basically, so it's interesting that even like you said, the control decks top out at 6 mana, and I think that a large part of that is to do with the fact that playing only one card in a turn, because I mean really once you get to 9 mana you've technically only got 8 because you're using the Bloodborne spell as often as you can, so you want to use it at 8 mana. So any 9 mana thing that they put in the game would have to be ridiculously absurd, and honestly off the top of my head I can't think of anything that's 9 mana in the game anymore. So, and then at 8 mana, the things that you have are generally either game winning and or board wiping. So things like Obliterate or Spiral Technique, stuff like that. Chimera saw some play, but that was in Magma, which ramped it out with things like Flash Reincarnation. So I think the next step down is 7 mana, which Pandora. I've been tempted to put Pandora in this deck. I know several people that have put Pandora in this sort of mid-range or control phase. And the only problem I have with Pandora is that Magma is really happy to Plasma Storm you, so you don't really want to be spending 7 mana and a big card on something that just dies basically for free along with the rest of your board. The Bone Reaper at least deals 2 damage that turn, so it may seem small, but sometimes dealing 2 damage to something, say like a Macanta, is a huge deal that the Pandora just can't do. So I don't think it's technically indicative of Duelist as a game, just the current meta and the restriction of cards that we have so far. I think if they in the next expansion start releasing some really strong 7 and 8 mana minions, and especially if the meta kind of slows down a little bit, then we'll be able to sort of have stuff top out higher.
Right, yeah. So like, your top end right now is just kind of the Bone Reaper, one Zenrui. Now, Zenrui got nerfed, and it was made a 4/4 instead of a 4/3, and they added a mana to make it 6 mana. Now that Lantern Fox and Spelljammer, which were two of its more common targets, along with just Shadow Sister, I guess is kind of public enemy number one now. Do you think
Yeah,
Zenrui is still worth a slot given the changes, or is that a card that you might look to cut in the future?
well, Bone Reaper is still actually in the meta. There's been a lot of Control Reavers. Zane, actually, the other guy that is a Grandmaster that qualified for Worlds, runs Bone Reaper and Reaver. Um, there's another player, Dragal, who actually won the tournament that I was talking about yesterday, where Panda JJ and I came third and fourth. He runs Bone Reaper and Reaver, and he won the tournament. So, Bone Reaper is certainly a card that you love to Zenrui. I mean, getting a 6 mana minion for 6 mana and removing a 6 mana minion for 6 mana and getting a 4/4 like that, it's a really huge tempo swing.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, when Zenrui's good, it's very good. It's just
Lucian is also still in the meta, and technically speaking, if you use Zenrui just a plain vanilla 2/3 with no abilities, then Zenrui is good. It's dealt 3 damage, it's given you a 4/4 and a 2/3, which for 6 mana, is actually it's quite decent. It's certainly not a bad play.
right.
And then if you can use it on something like a Lakian, or like you said, a Fox, or if you can use it on the what's the other sister, like you said,
Shadow Sister,
yeah, Shadow
Kalento, I
Sister
think.
Galeno,
Kaleno.
and then all these things. If you can use it on a 2/3 with a special ability, like for example the Celerity Archeon minion,
Azurite Lion.
yeah, Azurite Lion, stuff like that. Sometimes you have people playing. I used it the other day on ladder against what's his name? The British guy. I used it on his Sunforged Lancer, and then healed myself. which was just huge amounts of value for me, like removing his 2/4, gaining a 2/4, gaining +1 attack. Um, so there's definitely enough cards, I think, in the meta to make it playable. Um, again, against Magma, you can steal their Grow even, or their young Silithar. Every deck has to run 2 drops basically,
Right.
and a late game 2 drop, it's a strong play against, and then a certain set number of decks also have amazing targets for it that can just, once you steal something with the Zenrui, it pretty much wins you the game on the spot. So I certainly wouldn't want to take it out just yet. But if Argion becomes too strong, I might replace it for a Hollow Grove Keeper, because Hollow Grove Keepers can be just as strong as Zenrui for 1 less mana.
Right. Yeah. It's yeah. That's another card that when it has a target, it's very very strong, and when it doesn't, it's it's pretty weak. But
Mm.
so that's a pretty swingy card too. So you're I'm sorry. I really like spending a lot of time in this deck because I'm very fond of it. One thing you
Well,
were talking. I'm sorry. What was
it's
that?
the only deck that's technically still in the meta. I don't think that once we move on to Aggro Argian, we won't have much to talk about there, because the deck is kind of, everyone's moved to a mid range or a slower version because of the Spelljammer hit.
Right. Yeah. In this deck, you said earlier that Endurus is a game where you don't play one spell a turn. You need to play two or more usually.
Yeah.
And in this deck, you use, I'd say, we can call it 5 card draw spells because the cryogenesis will allow you to cycle a Snow Chaser if you need to draw another card. So
Yeah.
you only have really the Sworn Sisters for card draw. So what makes that your choice? Because this was pre Spelljammer nerf, and you have other options for card draw there, as well as something like a Sojourner if you wanted to go
Well,
that route. So what makes this card? You spoke really highly of it in your write up as well. So what makes this so powerful that you like to
which
play it?
card? The Lycaean.
Yes, the Lakian. Sorry. Yes.
Um, well, Lycaean, ever since the sisters came out, I said Earth Sister would get a nerf because it was so strong, and it did. I
Yep.
said Lycaean is probably playable, and I underestimated how playable it is. But in my defense, in that meta, we had a 5 mana Zenrui that was getting already run 2 of in most decks, 1 or 2 of them, and then now, we almost don't see Zenrui at all, and it's 6 mana. So Lycaean is, I mean, not Lycaean, Kaleno is certainly, a lot stronger than I thought she was going to be. And then I saw the Sworn Sister, and I said, well, this is nuts. They've just given every faction a reliable, strong card draw. And a lot of people say, well, your faction cards are not all of them are good. But the thing about Duelist is you get to replace a card every turn. So if you're clever with the way that you play your Lycaean, you'll always get at least a draw off of it. Basically, you'll get a 2/4 for 4 that draws you at least 1 card, and then speaking consistently, over like within variants, sometimes off of a Lycaean, you'll get 2 cards that you wouldn't put in your deck that are actually perfect for the situation that you're in. Sort of, like we were talking about my Aggro Argian deck, I put in a Lycaean. There's been times when I would throw down my Lycaean and I get a big minion that then the next turn I can just play that single big minion, and all of a sudden they've used all their removal. They've either used it or thrown it away, thinking I'm an aggressive deck, and then they have to deal with something like a Grandmaster, what's his name, Grandmaster Zur, Alex Stormblade, even a Second Sun or an Ironcliff. That's a good example in Archeon, and Fade's kind of the same thing. You're playing a control deck, and all of a sudden, there's things like Frostfire, Boundless Courage. Maybe you've played 3 Chromatic Colds. All of a sudden, you've got a 4th. You've played 3 Hearth Sisters. You've got a 4th Hearth Sister now sitting in your hand. Iceblade Dryad gives your Snow Chaser flying so that you can reach them on the other side of the board. There's all these things that you can just draw that you wouldn't normally put in your deck that's become perfect for the situation that you're in.
Right.
And I think that, in my experience with Lycaean, that happens about as often maybe slightly less as you get some of the more useless cards that you can't use at all. Like maybe you get a an avalanche where they're nowhere near your side of the board, or you get a crystal wisp when you're already at 9 mana. But like I said, you can just replace those cards, so it's not the worst situation. Actually, I want to mention Lightning Blitz. There was a game where I was playing on ladder, and I was right at the top, and I was just that one win away um, from the first place at the time, and I pulled a Lightning Blitz against a Songhai player, and I managed to Lightning Blitz my entire board pretty much right within range of him, and be able to remove like some of the stuff that I had no answer for. I was kind of hoping to get either a Hearth Sister, a Hailstone, or a Chromatic Cold to deal with his board. But the Lightning Blitz, which I never would have put in my deck, could deal with all of his board and then some. And it was just one of those situations where you just think, there's no way I could have done this without Lakian.
Right. Yeah, it seems like, sometimes you're going to be playing it usually later in the game is when, you'll be able to play the cards that it gives you a lot of the time. And it seems like in those type of situations, getting a certain niche card can sometimes be better than getting a card that's just in your deck. In the
Yeah,
worst case, you can just replace it and get that card in your deck. So yeah, I think
yeah,
Sworn Sister is very very strong, and I've played it in a lot of my decks, and I knew it kind of fell out of things kind of cycle in terms of what the popular card draw is and what the popular four drops are. So there's always kind of a changing standard card draw. So I was just interesting to see that you spoke of it incredibly highly in your write up, and that it was a choice you made. And the last thing I just wanted to touch on really quick is, oh, sorry, you don't run any Winter's Wakes at all, even though you've run a small Walls package. Is there a reason that you decided not to go for that?
Winter's Wake is perhaps one of the most situational cards in the game with a potentially small payoff. You need at least two walls within range of something that your opponent has for it to be playable. 8 mana for +8/+8. Um, at the worst case scenario, you don't have any walls in general, or you only have one wall within range. You could have two or three walls, but they're not within range of your opponent. Um, and at 8 mana and a whole card, it's just too circumstantial. It can be good, but even though we're running all these walls, like I reckon you could add in, you could be running still the rest of the walls too. You could be
Bone Chill
running
Barrier.
you should, yeah, Bone Chill Barrier with the Glacial Elemental combo. So you've got the Bone Chill, you've got Gravity Well, you've got Blazing Spines. Say you're running even three Blazing Spines, and I think Winter's Wake still wouldn't even be a one of because it's so situational. It's having to have all those walls on the board and within range, and like I said, for it to just be good, you need two walls. So that means for it to compensate for the worst case and most likely case, you need to have three walls for it to actually be great. I think if they wanted to make Winter's Wake playable, they should have made it at most 6 mana. Or they should have toned it down a lot and made it, maybe give all your walls +2/+2 and can now move for maybe like 5 mana would have been a really decent card. But the problem is it's all it either wins you the game on the spot or it does nothing, and 90% of the time it does nothing. So it's not a card that a player like me who feels like I can outskill my opponent over time. I don't want these high variance cards in my deck. I want reliable cards that are always going to have a minimum of an okay effect and a maximum of a good effect. Those are the kinds of reliable cards that I try and put in my deck, not these high variance sort of all-in cards where my draw and RNG decides the game much more than the interactions that I can make.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. I've in some of my videos I talk about we're not building theme decks. We're trying to look for synergies. So
Yeah,
you're not looking to build a walls deck. It just happens to have walls in it. So
exactly.
that's pretty interesting. Oh, I think I'd imagine that their issue with putting it at less than 8 mana was going gravity well into a making them all 4/5s with provoke is kind of a dispel or die situation. So I
But
imagine.
then, I mean, like I said, they kind of do that with Kara, though, don't they? A Kara plus either Merc Blood or Lady Lock. You can have your Gravity Wells as 2/3 provokes and stuff like that. You can have your Bone Chill barriers as 2/4 provokes.
Right.
So,
No, that's
um,
certainly true.
I think yeah, making it cheaper would have definitely made it into a threatening combo. But I think there's a bunch of combos in Jules that are way stronger. I think they intentionally made it not too strong because I don't think they want that kind of gameplay in their game where you put off the game until you get to 8 mana and then you combo out some unstoppably strong thing where you get a bunch of stuff on the board. The Songhai version, what's it called? Cone of Corns or
Corn of horns. I think it's cone of horns, maybe
Cone of Horns. That's the one.
something like that.
That's another example of actually there was a couple of players that made it quite strong and managed to get quite high in the ladder, but it's certainly not a tournament deck, and it's because, like I said, these decks are just slightly weaker than needs to be viable, so that players can have fun playing them and it can be interesting, but you won't see it in tournaments.
Right. Yeah, I think I won a game in the DPL one week with I got a cone of horns off the Zhao, I think it is, the battle pet from Shanghai,
Yeah,
and that really surprised my opponent and myself. So, yeah,
yeah,
that's
that's
a
like what we're talking about
similar
with
type of
Lucian,
card.
where you never. I mean, you wouldn't really plan a deck around Cone of Horns, but once you get it, if you play Lucian in Songhai and you get a Cone of Horns, quite often late game you're just like, well, that's perfect. That's exactly what I need.
Right. Yeah. So that was a similar experience. So before we go too crazy, let's just move on to this real quick. And one thing, I mean, this is a pretty standard aggro deck. You definitely chose to go faster, whereas Algion seems like something you can play pretty much at any speed, mid-range being probably the most popular,
Yeah,
which is basically very similar, but maybe without the flame bloods and with maybe substituting out a tempest and some spelljammers for maybe sworn sisters or something, and having a couple on the top end. I mean,
yeah,
it really can be played anyway. There's one thing about this deck that I think a lot of people shy away from is you have just 4 different one-ofs in this deck, and most
yeah.
people always say you want consistency. So what is it about this particular setup that drew you towards it over just putting say 2 of each of Repulsor Beast and Lightbender and the Silver God Knight?
The way I look at three ofs is firstly, how unhappy are you if you draw 2 in your hand, right? So if I have 2 Azurite Lions, or if I have 2 Holy Immolations, for example, or 2 Arclight Regalia, am I excited about that? Is that a good thing for me? Like, am I like, perfect, this is what I need? And with those cards that I just listed, yes, you at 2 Azurite Lions means if they can remove the first one, but they can't remove the second one, all of a sudden they're gonna get hit for huge damage, or I'm gonna be able to take out 2 targets with my 1 minion. It's the same kind of thing with Holy Immolation. They'll play around the first one, and then you play that, and it damages them, and then the second one they're like, oh well, he won't have the second Holy Immolation, and then you can again get huge value off of it. And Art like Regalia, like we are talking about before when we were talking about Fae, Art like Regalia is one of those cards where the first one is difficult to remove, but the second one is almost impossible. You have to deal like that 4 damage to over 4 damage just to get through it. Like if you have you can't you just remove 3 and 4 attack minions at will with it. It's really it becomes like almost overwhelming. But things like, for example, the Repulsor Beast, the first one, which you usually play late game, is really good. But once you Repulsor Beast too much, you if they can just run away, and all of a sudden, you don't want to Repulsor early, so you're generally replacing it early. And then if you're sitting with 2 in your hand, you're just sitting there thinking, well, I replaced 1 and I've still got 1, and I have to wait a couple of turns to find a good spot to play this. So repulsor piece you don't necessarily want a lot of. Lakian's the same thing. I already have 3 Spelljammers in the deck for draw, and then in that meta, a lot of people were playing Spelljammer, so you would quite often draw off of their Spelljammer. And with Lakian, it is an aggro deck, so if you're playing Lakian, you're not going to play then a second Lakian because you have like you've gotten all those extra cards that you need to close out the game is the idea. You're not a sustain deck, you're an aggro deck, and if you've dropped your hand, you just want to slightly refill it. You don't necessarily want to, keep sustaining the damage in. So you only want one Lakian. Lightbender, again, we already have the double Ephemeral Shroud. So Lightbender's kind of one of those cards where we're like, okay, we need a silence, but we probably won't need a second silence, or if they don't have a silence target and you're sitting with double Lightbender, you think, okay, well, I replaced one Lightbender. And then finally we fall on the Silverguard Knight. Now the Silverguard Knight is the only card in the deck that I wouldn't mind having 3 of. It's very strong, especially in an aggro deck, but with all these one-ofs already, we had to fill that empty spot with something, and Primus, the Primus Fist and the earlier 2-drops. I think we already have enough 2-drops. Basically, we have 10 2-drop, 12 2-drops actually. 10 2-drops that you want to play on turn 1, two extra that you can play on turn 1 if you want to, or can play in general. And then we also have 3 1-drops and 3 0-mana things. So, we don't need more 2-drops. But as far as 3-drops go, we had double Blistering Scorn and the triple Spelljammer. So I just wanted an extra thing that I could just play turn 1 going second, and I thought, or turn 2 if my 2-droppers stayed, you can play a 3 and a 2, and I just thought like this is a really strong thing. I thought that 3 Blistering Scorn was too many Blistering Scorn as well, because usually once you use one, that's it. You don't necessarily want to have to use a second one because it'll hurt your own minions too much, or it'll hurt if you play double Blistering Scorn in a turn, your first one ends up being a 3/2. So that's just it. I wouldn't suggest necessarily playing a lot of one-ofs in decks, but in certain decks like this one, and even the Fey one too, you notice there was a lot of 2-ofs. Situational cards, especially with the replace mechanic, it's not bad to play 1 or 2-ofs when you have replace. Are you there?
Sorry, I muted that. Dog's barking. I tend to play more one-ofs than I think most people do because I feel like the replace mechanic is so strong. So I was just interested to see someone else playing that, because a lot of decks seem to be very tight 2s and 3-ofs almost all the way up. So it's interesting that you kind of take that approach. So we spent a lot of time on the decks, more than I was expecting, and now we just have a few plays you wanted to go over real quick. So I'm just gonna open up the first one and we'll go from there.
Yeah, that shouldn't take too long.
You can
I
give
think
us...
this one, we'll watch this first, and then I'll talk about it. So actually, I'll say what's happening here is I'm versus No Way It's Jay, who's a really strong high level player, and he's playing an aggro deck, and I'm playing an aggro deck, and he's on less health than me, and I think you've got the wrong clip first. If you just go to the other one. The other one, this one. Oh, is it the same? Is it different? What's the first one? Go to the first one. Okay. Maybe I did it wrong. I think is it this one?
I can play it through and see what happens. I can edit this, edit the stuff out.
That's put the voice on. Let me just.
Humans does not body block him here from preventing the Heart Sister from reaching him. Jay. He is dead. He is dead next turn.
Jay's calling it with those emotes too. See,
he has to body block.
This is what I say. Jay is
after that, but
is that the one you were talking about?
A lot of damage
So-
here if he manages to clear that. Look at his ham, double prime his fist, and Frostfire. That is 3, 5, 7, 7 out of hand damage paired with that. If Humans does not body block him here from, preventing the Heart Sister from reaching him, he is dead. He is dead next turn.
Jay's calling it with those emotes too. See,
He has to body block.
This is what I say. Jay is
After that, but
So if you listen to it, basically, what's going on is I'm sitting there. I'm on 15 health, and I've just placed the Lycian. The reason I placed it there was because it is both within range of his general, and potentially if I need to body block with it, it does that. Now, the day before the tournament, I was actually sitting there watching Grinch play, and we had a big a discussion, if you will, about how much out of hand damage Faye can do, and generally speaking, she can do 1 or 2 more damage than she has mana. And especially can do about 3 damage per card. Now I'm sitting there and I'm on 15 health, and he's got 2 minions with 3 attack on the board, and his general is another 2 attack, so that's 8 damage on board. And I'm looking at his hand size, which was 4 cards, and he has I think the next turn 8 mana.
Right.
And I'm thinking, with 4 cards and 8 mana, he can definitely do that extra sort of 7 damage that he needs. And the casters were actually really impressed, and most players wouldn't stop and think, well, wait a minute, 8 damage is a lot of damage, or 7 damage is a lot of damage, especially when he's already used his Bloodborne spell, and my opponent is so low, like I should stay here and I should, pressure him, right? But looking at the board, I thought, well, I've just pulled this Lycian and I've gotten an Ironcliff Guardian. If I can prolong the game, the Ironcliff Guardian's going to completely shut him down, or at least slow him down enough that I can win the game through pressure that way. So what I end up doing is actually moving up 1 step, removing the Tiger, and body blocking with the Spelljammer. And because of that, No Way It's Jay he couldn't lethal me. He couldn't get me for lethal damage, and I managed to kill him the very next turn because of his super low health. So I just thought this was a really impressive play, because a lot of the casters were thinking, what is he doing? Why is he stepping away? What is he thinking about? What's his game plan? What's going through his mind? And one of the things, I didn't place him exactly on the cards he had. I didn't know that he had double Primus and and I forget what that spell is.
Frostfire?
Yeah, Frostfire. But I did place him potentially on a lot of damage. There's things like, I knew he was playing Flameblood Warlocks. I knew he was playing Primus Fists. A lot of aggro Fey decks, for example, run the Arcanist that gives you, an extra card. What's that called? The
Lawmaster?
Alcune Lawmaster, yeah,
Okay.
that's the one. So I knew that there was potentially, even with things like Chromatic Cold, there was potentially a way that he could deal enough damage to kill me. Snowpiercer is another card that I thought he might have, so I thought, the best way that I can win this game is to basically run away, and it end up, paying off for me, and I won. So let's have a look at the Reaver replay, I think. If you go to that one.
I believe that's this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So here what I'm doing is, if you look at my hand, I have, you can just pause it once I step back here. So just pause it for a second. Yeah.
Your hands up at the top.
Yeah. You might be thinking, well, why didn't I, step forward and sort of, what's the word? Either play, because I can remove the Abyssal Juggernaut with a hero attack and a Phoenix Fire. I can play the hero power, and then run my my Katara forward and backstab him. I could have run back like I did and played my Bloodborne spell, and put a killing edge on it, and then you know, been able to remove his 5/5 there. But what I did was I stepped back and I played the. If you just press play now, I step back and I place the Katara and I put the killing edge on it and I go, okay, we'll pass turn. Now the reason for that is because firstly, it cycles the killing edge, right? So I keep my hand full, which is really important in this matchup. You know, a lot of people say this matchup is. We can just pause it again. A lot of people say that this matchup. Oh, too far. Say that this matchup is cast favored, but that's because the Songhai players don't know how to play it. The biggest thing that you want to do is, like I said, keep your hand full at all times. The more cards in your hand, the more options you have, and the more damage you can potentially do in the long term. You know, you're not always trying to aggro them down. You usually almost always want to grind them out. You can aggro them down if you have, like, you know, God hand, the perfect hand. But usually what you do is you grind them out. And this is a perfect example, like I said, of that type of game where you do that. And the other reason I did it too was because I have the Blood Rage Mask and a bunch of spells in my hand. And I want to be able to save my my BBS for being able to use with the Blood Rage Mask. So that way I can just, you know, dump as much stuff as possible and get, like, that Blood Rage Mask is, again, it's really good for grinding out the damage. So if we go to the next replay, you'll see here my opponent has moved forward his Juggernaut, played a Provoke, and sort of pinged my Katara. Now the casters are commenting about, I have two choices here. I can go absolutely crazy with a bunch of face damage and get my opponent really low, or I can start, you know, trying to remove his board. And if you watch it, my choice is, you can press play now. Just if you watch it, I choose to remove the board, and it ends up in the long term winning me the game, as that Katara just consistently walks across everything that he has before finally dealing a bunch of damage and getting him within lethal range. And it's a really close game, and I feel almost without a doubt that if I'd gone face here and tried to burst him down, he would have won this game. You know, he has probably more damage on the board and more ways of removing stuff than I do. So you know, it would have been a mistake to just start going all face, because he's dealing, you know, potentially 10 damage. He would have killed me in 2 turns, and I don't think I could have killed him in that many turns. Whereas this way, I can remove his board, and I keep removing his stuff, and like I said, I grind him out until I can kill him. And while this deck, the Reaver deck, is now, you know, out of the meta, I think it's important that we look at games like this and understand how certain matchups go, and how knowing how to play a matchup decides who is the winner. Because a lot of people just go, oh, well, this deck is favored and that deck's favored, and then after that it's just, you know, it's just luck. But knowing how to play a matchup, you know, a lot of people will say that one deck is favored or the other deck is favored. But the truth is, it depends on how well each person knows what's important to do in a matchup, you know, because it's hard to describe just how much and in what way that matters, because obviously each turn, you know, the plays that you make, there's so many different plays that you can make in Duelist. A lot of players, they don't see this. They don't see that there's lots of different plays. They think, oh, you're only restricted to doing the really obvious ones. But the more you stop and watch your replays and think, well, wait a minute, you know, I could have done this or I could have done that. You know, maybe I could have, like, maybe that turn I could have just drawn with the Heaven's Eclipse, you know, to see if I could get something like some more mana vortexes or some more position swapping things. You know, maybe I could have gone all face. Maybe I could have just removed the taunt and tried to run away from the the massive creature in my face, all these little things that you can do that are different, and you just have to know, which is going to give me the advantage in the long game. So stuff like that, I think is really important. Even still in the meta now that Reaver's gone, Cass is another deck where you options, you quite often have a lot of options on where to place minions and what to play, what to ping, when to use your BBS. I think a lot of people, the second that they have their BBS active and they have 1 mana and they have an opponent with a 1 mana minion, with a 1 health minion, they'll just use it. They'll just think, okay, I've got 1 mana, I've got my BBS, he's got a minion on 1 health, I should use it. But that's not always the right decision, because sometimes you might want to use it for the next turn. So you have to plan out your next turn, and there's lots of things like that where you have to think, what is my overall game plan here? And I think this game was a perfect example of that, where I won what a lot of people would call an unfavorable matchup just by making the right decisions.
That's interesting. You've mentioned like a couple times that, or it seems like a couple times you said that you tend to be sort of it looks like a kind of a patient player, in that you feel like if you can prolong the game, you'll have the opportunity to outplay your opponents, even it
Yes.
seems very high level opponents. So what is it like as a newer player, where we're not as confident in our abilities to just outplay? How can we sort of develop the ability to see the long-term game plans in certain matchups, and how can we evaluate those matchups? I know that's a huge open-ended question, but if you just had to give a few
No, that's
sentences.
a really good question. And it's one that's I've asked a lot, because you don't necessarily enter a game knowing everything about it, right? Like when you first start playing a game, you're not just like, I instantly know everything I can about how to play it. And even now in Duelist, as a long-term player, I can't say that I know everything there is to know about it. I'm still constantly trying to learn, and I think that's an important thing for new players. Is, like I said, watch high-level replays, watch your own replays, sit down anytime. A good exercise is anytime on one of your turns or one of their turns, especially probably turn 3 to turn 6 or something like that, when you've got a bunch of cards, and just sit down and think, what is literally every single play that I could have made here? What would be the board state after that play, and then what would be the turns leading into the next play, and just sit down and think, well, what's the best play, and why is it good? And then you can also, like I said, a lot of people, and I plan to do it a lot more, especially streamers do it a lot. People like Hosuku and Grincha often do it, and they'll explain their plays, and they'll explain why it's better to do something. Like a good example is here, instead of playing maybe the Katara, like my Katara somewhere, or instead of using the Mana Vortex and the Phoenix Fire to maybe I should Mana Vortex Phoenix Fire his face, or Mana Vortex Phoenix Fire to try and remove the 3/1. I can just play my BBS and place it right next to this what did we say that minion was called again?
Primary Shield or the Ooze?
The ooze, yeah, that's the one. Ooze. I can make it so the ooze, I die. I basically use a ping of my own to, a cast BBS of my own to remove that ooze by placing my BBS there, and it's little things like that that if you're in a game and you're a new player, you won't necessarily think to do that. You'll just think, okay, I've got 1 mana, I play my Katara, like, I play my 1 mana card. Like, I know that's what a lot of new players just do. They have 1 mana, they play a 1 mana card. But if you sit down and you go through your replays and you think, okay, what is literally like all the plays that I could do here? I could have used my BBS. I could have placed it there. What would have happened then? Okay, well, going through it, the next thing that would have happened is that the ooze attacks my my BBS, and the ooze is gone, and it's not going to deal 3 damage to me or my Katara or anything else. So, you sit down and you think, okay, well, that was actually a really good play. I should do that more often, and the more that you watch these replays and think through your turns and think, and try and work out these different plays, the more it sticks in your head so that next time you're in a similar situation, you think, okay, I remember last time I played my Katara and it got instantly killed by his ooze, and that was a bad play. And when I watched the replay, I thought, okay, I should use the BBS, and then you'll be in another situation like that. And that's why I said about this matchup is, I played it enough times where I thought, okay, I've tried going like all face against Cass, and she ends up killing me faster than I kill her. But if I remove her board, and slowly grind out that damage, then she ends up losing in the long game because, I've got more value cards than she has by keeping my hand full. Like I said, making those plays to keep my hand full, keep removing the board, and then I win. And the only reason I worked that out was because, like I said, I watched my replays and I played the matchup enough times, and I watched other people play it and watched their replays and thought, I know how to win this now.
That's no, that's thank you so much. That's very interesting. I've said in the past that like if I wanted to get to rank 5, for instance, I could probably do that by writing a bot that says use all your mana every turn and then clear the board. And if you just follow those two rules, you'll do pretty well. And then I think the hardest part in games like this, CCGs, especially one with a board, with that extra element, is learning when to break those rules and not going for the obvious play of, oh, I need to remove something, I'll use Phoenix Fire, or I'm playing Songhai, let me do face damage. So I think
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear someone like yourself kind of describe how you go through the process of thinking of the non-obvious plays and the lines that someone won't see if they're just used to using their cards in one certain way. You
Yeah,
know.
exactly. That's something as a high level player, that you learn to do is just look at all possible plays, and then you look at the board state before and after and think, okay, this play was the best play because of what it did to the board. So a lot of people, like you said, they get used to just playing a certain way, and if you want to keep improving, you have to keep thinking, what crazy things that I can do that people don't expect. This, if this isn't working for me in the games that you lost, you sit down and you go, okay, so I lost this game. Why did I lose, and what can I do better in the future? And it's important to know that some games you just can't win. I had a game on the ladder recently that got me really upset where my opponent had an insane opener into perfect draws, and there was nothing I could do, and I just had to accept that. I just thought, like a certain number of your games, you're just going to lose, and you just have to move on. And after that loss, I think I went, like 90% win rate for my next 20 games. Instead of a lot of people, that's the other thing I could suggest to new players, is a lot of people, they'll lose a game that they couldn't win, and they'll get really mad, and they won't focus. They'll just start thinking to themselves, all of my games that I lose because I'm unlucky, and all the games I win, because I'm lucky. And they stop thinking, well, wait a minute, a certain number of the games I lose are unwinnable, but a certain number that maybe I could have won it if I played better. And you need to keep that in mind when you're playing, is think, okay, this looks unwinnable, but maybe there's a way I can find it to win it. And then if you keep practicing long enough, eventually you start winning more of those games.
Right. No. I don't know if you've ever heard the quote. It's about baseball, but American baseball. So they say that every team will win 54 games and every team will lose 54 games, and it's the 54 in the middle that matters what you do and affects how your season will go. And I
Yeah.
think there's some games where you're going to draw the nuts and you're going to get that backstab on them for 15 damage on turn 2, and you're going to win. And sometimes they're going to do that to you, or they're going to draw 3 spectral revenants in a row and beat you down. And it's important not to think of all your games that you lose as unwinnable, because even if some might be, and not to get down on yourself when you're playing a card game. And there is an element of luck, and there is RNG, but looking for these the opportunities where you can win, because it's the it's small percentage points that really change the best players from the regular S rank players like me to someone who's just getting to diamond. It's maybe 5 win percentage points that separates those, which is one out of every 20 games or so. So
Yeah. Yeah.
finding just one win is so huge, and your way of looking at all the lines, I think, is is really something that
I
helps
went through
people.
some stat analysis, and I found that even in S rank, just one or two, stat percentages. So just one or two games in 100 makes a huge difference. It can be the difference between being number one or number 10. It can be the difference between being number 10 or being number, 20. And it can be the difference between being like number 20 and not even in the top 50. If in 100 games, there's say four of those games that you could have won instead of losing, all of a sudden, you go from being just an average S rank player to being one of the best S rank players in the game. One of the people in the top 50 list that CPG publishes at the end of every month. Just four games in 100. You just got to find those four games where you just make that slightly better play. A lot of people, myself included, will say, well, 100 games, just four, a lot of it is luck then. And it's true, there is some luck involved. Sometimes not the same players make it, but it's good to also to look at the ladder and say, well, for example, Dragal, the player that I mentioned before that won the tournament, he's got four accounts, and earlier in the season, all four of them were top five, and then I think at the moment, three of them are top 10, and one of them's about 20 something, and it's important to see there that while the 20 something and the one that's second, there's a huge gap of 20 points between them. Every single one of them are really high, and that's to show you that there's actually a lot less variance in this game than you would think, and a lot of it is just knowing the right deck to play, the right cards to put in your deck, and the right plays to make. So once you learn that, once you have that all together and know how to play the game, you will find that you consistently do well. And it's not necessarily always, a matter of trying to be one of the top S rank players. Maybe you're a bronze or a silver player that's just trying to get a little bit better. Maybe you're gold and you want to break into rank 5, like you said. And the key to that is, like I said, is just finding, net decking, as people say a lot of the time, finding the right cards to put in your deck. And then it's a big part of it, I feel a bigger part, is just learning the right plays to make. Watch your own replays, watch other people's replays and go, well, wait a minute, if I'd done this or I'd done that better, And I think it is a really good exercise, like I said, is to just sit down with a turn where there's lots of different plays and go, what is literally every single play that I could make? And it makes you better at the game just trying to find these different plays, because a lot of people don't even see the really good plays. They don't see them as possible because they're not used to looking for different plays.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, one thing, especially about Duelist, is every turn when you get to move your minions or place your minions, that just opens up the combination of plays so huge. So you might think, play this minion here and attack, and that's the obvious play, but you do have the option of playing it somewhere else. And I notice that sometimes in my games as I go later game, I'll stop paying attention to my general positioning sometimes, or if I have a minion that gets Repulsor Beast, I stop running with it or running with it efficiently, and it's all those little things that, kind of add up to one game here or one game there.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
And they just go unnoticed when you lose, and you're like, oh, they drew Obliterate, or oh, Songhai's broken, and it's really easy to kind of fall into that trap. So, well, thank you so much for taking the last about 75 minutes with me.
That's all right. It's my pleasure always.
I've learned a lot about Duelist, and now I'm gonna have to learn a lot about video editing to cut out the nonsense we had when we tried to roll some of these clips.
Yeah,
But
sorry about that.
no, not your fault at all. So thanks so much, and you have a Twitter, and a stream if you want to give people that, just so they can find you. And
Yeah, my stream is the usual Twitch, and it's called Humans HS, because I used to be a big Hearthstone player, so it's just Humans, my name, and then HS. And my Twitter is, I believe, also Humans HS. Yeah, it is also Humans with the HS at the end, because like I said, I actually come from, I spent just over a year, close to 2 years, playing Hearthstone competitively. I played a lot of the tournaments there, and I never got real high on the ladder. I think about 200 was the highest I was on the ladder. But the tournaments that I played in for Strivewire, for example, I was number 1 on Strivewire for a little bit and stayed number 10 for quite a long time. So that's the tournament I won a bunch of them. I think 2 or 3 Strivewire tournaments, and then 2 or 3 other tournaments I won, and I used to place fairly highly, fairly consistently. So, yeah, Hearthstone's my background, but Duelist is my game of choice now. But I've remained with the same Twitter and Twitch account, which is, like I said, Humans, my name, and then a HS at the end.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so hopefully people will check out some of your stuff and they'll be able to improve watching you. So thanks so much, and we'll just wrap that up here.